Welcome to the study of the book of Job, and today we will continue the study of the book of Job by looking at the speeches of God. And unfortunately, we weren't able to look at Elihu's speeches. Of course, after Job finishes his appeal for innocence in chapters 29, 30, and 31, God doesn't speak immediately after, as we all know. It's actually Elihu, the young man, who feels like he has to defend God. And he has some interesting points to say. Perhaps the most important in Elihu's speeches is his last chapter, where he comes a little bit close to some of the things that God is going to say in his reply. But let's look at this text, and let's start with the verse 1 in Job chapter 38. Vaya'an Adonai et Yov min hasara vayomer. We're of course familiar with this expression. The Lord answered Job. But then this is of course something new. It says here, min hasara. So the Lord answered Job from somewhere, and Sarah is usually translated from the whirlwind, from a storm. And the idea is that God is answering Job from a tempest, from a storm. So there's a theophany that implies at least a little bit that it was quite scary. So God appears in a storm, in the whirlwind, the tempest, and said, Vayomer, of course everybody knows this. So he says this, Mize, who this, right? We have to supply the verb to be, it's a verbless clause. Who is this? And then it's telling us, Machshich eitza b'milin bali da'at. Machshich. Of course, it's very simple to analyze. It's a participle, he feels, from chashach. And hopefully most of you recognize the noun choshech. Choshech, we've seen it, appears many times in the book of Job and means darkness. The opposite is or, light. But here, who is this one who is basically darkening counsel or obscuring counsel? Who is this basically who darkens counsel? And then it explains v'milin, with, but understood here as with. Milin, notice the Aramaic plural, but we've seen that before, from mila word, with words, and bali is usually understood here as without, as most translation, without knowledge. I hope everybody recognizes this word knowledge. Usually it's spelled with the patach under, but again, I just want to point out to you because of this break that appears always at the end of a verse, notice here, this is actually a sign. It's a sign that indicates the end of the verse, of course, and it appears always in the last syllable or in the last word. This lengthens the patach to a kametz, but sounds the same for us, most of us. Bali da'at. So again, this of course should be, and you guys recognize that, should be a patach, should be da'at, like that. Okay, well, that's not very well, doesn't look very straight, so I'm just going to use the red. So it should be da'at. Da'at. Okay, now, so who is this? So let's see what happens. So again, of course, you want to look at the word sa'ara, and it appears in Job, it appears in Proverbs. For example, look in Proverbs, Psalm 107:29. I put a few of the occurrences. He made a storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. So here, notice the translation is storm. So this is God appearing and, making the storm, the Sarah, right? Yakim Sarah lidmama vayecheshu Galehem. Gal, meaning wave, their waves were hushed. But notice how he made the storm be still. Yakim Sarah, the storm. Notice another occurrence, dress like a man. We shall see this later. Oh, actually, no, we're not in verse 3. So now if we look in verse 3, it says this, Ezarna. Actually, it's not read ezar. So be very careful. This is not read ezar, it's read ezorna. Ezorna. The reason this is a no, again, just let me draw it for you. This is quite important just for your understanding. The reason this is not a comet. A comet, it's a long A. It's a long A. So again, this can be a long A or it can be a short O. A short O is in a closed, so I'm going to put it for you here, closed, unaccented syllable. Unaccented syllable. Closed unaccented syllable. Now we know this is a closed syllable, but is it accented or not? It's unaccented because the accent is going to shift to this last phrase, to this na, to this particle of entreaty. So it says here, ezorna, so basically gird or dress, but let's say gird like a man. Well, right, we've seen gever many times. It appears even in Job 3. Like a man, chalatzecha. Basically, it's your loins. So gird your loins. Here is translated a little bit more freely, dress for action. But literally, gird like a man your loins. But what is interesting here, and I want to draw your attention to, this na. Na. Now it's a particle of entreaty. Most of the times, I would translate this in Hebrew with please. Please. But what is anomalous here is the fact that God is addressing Job. And almost never in the Bible, a superior does not use na toward an inferior. It happens very, very few times. Most of the times when na is used is an inferior addressing a superior. So this is very unusual. So I don't know, what do we do? Do we translate please or no? I think, obviously, as you may see from the translation, nobody translates please. But I think you should keep in mind at least that God is addressing Job in a polite way, I still think. Dress like a man, Job. Dress like a man for action. And then I will ask you, of course, the verb sha'al, kal, I will ask you, and you, right? And you make it known to me. Hodieni, it's a he feel from, of course, yada, rada, and the suffix as, and then the pronominal suffix ni, first common singular, and you inform me, literally. You make it known to me. Hodieni. So, of course, the question is this imperative or what is it? It looks like it is an imperative, he feel. So notice it's an imperative. So I shall ask, and you make it known to me. Right? And now God is challenging Job that, to answer God's question. Again, what is very important here is something that we see with Jesus much later. When Jesus, people come to ask him questions, but ultimately Jesus is the one asking questions because Jesus, of course, is God. And God is not the answer man. He's not something that just answers your question. He's the one who questions. And you're the one who's supposed to listen. So now it continues later and it says, continues like this. And I'm not sure why I left the space here. I think it's better just to go back to this. And I'm going to look at the next few verses. Eifo hayeta bayosti. Again, notice this is read O. Bayosti. We know this is a O because this is a common occurrence of an infinitive construct kal. This is an infinitive construct kal, and because it's an infinitive construct kal with a suffix, it's usually read yo, yosti. Where were you? Hayita kal, perfect. Second masculine singular from haya. Where were you when my literally, when my laying down the foundation of the earth. So of course, the infinitive construct doesn't have a tense. We get a tense from the context. So we would translate, where were you when I lay down? When I lay down the foundation of the earth. Hagid imiadata vina. So of course, this is a very important concept that we emphasized, but I want to repeat it again. And we will see it throughout this speech also. But it says, tell me, Hagid. Please do not miss this important verb. I hope you recognize it by now. It's from nagad. So we're dealing with a verb from nagad. So let me just put for you the verbal root here, just so you have an idea. So it's from nagad. Notice the assimilation of the noun is shown by the dagesh forte here. So nagad. So it's to tell. Tell me, hifiel imperative again. Tell is not really tell me. Most of the times translate tell me, it just says tell, literally. If you know, hopefully you all recognize this, so I will not going to spend time here, but it's the verb yada, right? If you know, understanding vina. Again, notice this book of Job is about suffering. It's about justice of God. It's about pain. But it's also about wisdom. It's also about understanding. And God now is challenging Job and telling him, look, tell me if you have understanding, if you know understanding. So we saw knowledge. Now we see understanding. We're going to see wisdom again. Misam memadeha kiteda. Again, I will not spend time, but notice this is from Yada. Who put its measure, technically speaking, who determined or who put or who set. Some, of course, is from sim. So I'll just put a yod here. It's from sim. Who put or who set its measurement? Because you know. Or who stretched out, nata, who stretched out upon it, kav. Kav is just a line, a measuring line. Who stretched out a measuring line, of course, with the idea of to build something, right? Who did that, right? So God is kind of presented as somebody who's stretching a line like a master builder. But where were you, right? Where were you when this happened? Alma adaneha hatva'u o mira even pinata. So just want to highlight to you, of course, just the easy part. This is easy to recognize. I hope you recognize it. It's a third feminine singular. Third feminine singular suffix. So it's basically its corner. Its corner or cornerstone is it's translated here corner, but literally it's like a corner. But on what? Alma. On what? Adena. Adena referring to its basis. And then this particular verse sunk. On what were its bases sunk? Hotva'u. So here, Hotva'u, of course, it's a hofal. It's a hofal, so that's why I'm reading it hot. Hotva'u. Notice again the accent is here. So again, it's a closed and accented syllable. And also, of course, it helps you if you recognize that this is a hofal. It's a hofal. So from tava, to sing the bases. On what were its bases sunk? Or who? Yara. Yara is to shoot. This is from where we get the word Torah, to instruct. Here, basically in the sense of shooting or laying, even pinata. Basically the even, of course, I hope you know the stone of its corners, or the cornerstone. So on who laid its cornerstone, I'm going to give you a few words, like for example, meimad, measure. We see it here in 35 in parallel with kav. But notice again, we're dealing with hapax. So again, very rare word. Don't expect you to memorize it. Eden, And then when you see something with a star, this word doesn't appear. It just means that this is what we think that the word appears in its absolute state. We have it in a various with various suffixes, for example, pedestal, base. And yara, as I mentioned, is to shoot, but here in this particular example, the dictionary gives it to lay a cornerstone. To lay a cornerstone, again, even pina, literally a stone at the corner. So the cornerstone. So this is where were you when that happened, and it continues. Baran yachad kochavei boker vayariu kol bnei Elohim. Interesting, we see the bnei Elohim here, which we see him at the beginning of the book, the sons of God. But then it continues here, when Baran, and Ran is from Ranan. Ranan, it appears many times in the Psalms, to shout for joy, basically. So, and it's an infinitive construct, notice a cal infinitive construct. When, basically, the shouting of joy together, who? Kochavei voker. The stars, of course, you recognize this a masculine plural. Of course, at this level, you shouldn't have a problem recognizing a masculine plural in construct. Kochav, stars, the star of the morning, when shouting basically for joy, the stars of the morning, yachad, together, hine matov, umanayim, shevet, achim, gam yachad, together, right, together, when basically the stars of the morning shouted for joy together, and, or maybe sang. Okay, you can translate it sang, but Ranan is a little bit more than just singing. It's like more of a joy of singing. But here is more clearly the shouted for joy from Ruah. Again, it appears in the Psalter. And all the sons of God shouted for joy. This is quite important because we understand that creation, when the earth was created, something that we don't find in Genesis, something was interesting. The morning stars sang together and the sons of God shouted for joy. This, of course, we also find in some Greek philosophy in the singing of the spheres of the universe. Is this idea that creation sings. We also find in the Chronicles of Narnia, when something is created, there's some kind of a music. And it's interesting that we find in the book of Job that when the cornerstones of the earth were laid, in poetical language, of course, when God was created, there was joy. The sons of God, the angelic beings, were shouting for joy. This is what happens. And then it continues. And again, I'm just going to bring it back here a little bit up. So we have it at the very beginning. We're going to continue with a few more verses. And then God continues, says, Vayasech bidlatayim yam, bagicho meirechem yeitzeh. And then let me just read. Basumi anan lebusho, va'arafel chatulato, va'ishbor alav chuki, va'asim. Perhaps again, just to help you a little bit, I should make some of these just to point out to you the verbal roots. I did point out many of them. Here, I didn't point out this one, which I think is quite important because it's not that easy to recognize. There, of course, is the verb sachach, but I will have it for you down here. So is the verb sachach. I'm just going to write it just so you have it handy here. So sachach. So vayasech. Let's look real quickly what the meaning of this. Of course, it's a vav consecutive imperfect, third masculine singular. Vayasech, be, okay, with. I hope you recognize this. Dalet. It's like basically doors. And yam, of course, everybody knows yam is sea. When he when he or who, or it continues the question, or who, yeah, it continues the sentence, or who shut in. So sachach, to shut off as a protection. But here is interesting, it's actually the he feel. And notice here with ba, to make inaccessible, to shut off with ba, or also with peers with al, but it's to shut off. I think that's better translation. Or who shut off with doors the sea, basically the sea. Bagicho meirchem yeitze. Here, of course, we have to look at this word gich. And again, I put it for you here, gich. We find it in the Jewish Aramaic and Syriac, Biblical Aramaic, Arabic as jaha. Of course, in Aramaic, just to remind you, sometimes the gimel is read as a j. So, for example, but it depends in which Aramaic. Like, for example, in which Arabic, I'm sorry, in which Arabic. For example, in Arabic, the word for mountain is jabal. So you might say, if you want to say the mountain of Moses, you say Jabal Musa. But there are some Arabic dialects, instead of Jabal Musa, they say Gebel Musa. So notice again, G here, it's Aramaic J. But some dialects of Arabic, I'm sorry, not Arabic, some dialects of Arabic preserve this G. But notice Gich, Gocha, daybreak. So here we have here Gicho, to burst forth. It's bursting forth. Kal, it's an infinitive. Again, it's an infinitive. So again, if we look at here again, when it's bursting forth from the womb, literally he came out. He came out. So, but it's translated when it burst out from the womb, right? It makes more sense. So, but notice this is usually left out translated. So we could technically speak when it's bursting out from the womb, but then it came out. Basumi, again, we have here an infinitive construct. How do we know these are infinitive construct? Usually when it's a preposition ba, so again, just don't forget when it's preposition, usually it's la. But we have ber or ka, and it's what appears to be a verbal form, then most likely it's an infinitive construct. And again, it doesn't have a tense, it has to be supplied from the context. When it's basically putting from sim appears as both. You will see the dictionary may give it to you as a sim, or it can give it to you as a sum. So it can give it both as a sim, as a sum. So so here it looks like a sum. When basically my putting basically the clouds, it's clothing, labush, it's clothing. Arafel is this darkness, and thick darkness, it's usually translated this as its swaddling band, but I would say this is probably uncertain. Again, I think I put for you some of these words. Notice here, chatula, again, it's a hapax. Swaddling bands, but do we know for sure? I don't know. We do find it in Ugaritic, which some consider a Semitic language from the Canaanites in the north, in present day close to Lebanon and Syria on the sea. So again, this is what is happening. And notice shabar, of course, shabar Allah. Shabar is to break into. But in this context, some think that it should be translated differently. So, so if we look at this, we can continue now with the translation. When basically I made clouds its garment, and darkness, actually deep darkness, its swaddling bands, and I broke upon it hooky. But again, broke doesn't work here. That's why some suggest instead of sabar, suggest sagor. So when I enclosed it in its ordained position, hook usually means statue or hook. Sometimes it's hook, Sometimes it's chok. It means like a statute, an ordinance. So, and this probably something that was, put in place, some boundary, right? But the translation is usually agreed upon when I prescribe limits for it. That's a good translation. And again, and I put this is easy to translate. Berea, it appears bars and basically doors. Doors again. We see doors again. Doors for the sea and also doors here. And I said, "Ad po tavo," and I said, "So far." Literally, until here you shall come, and you shall not continue. Literally, you shall not continue. You shall not continue from Yasaf. And ufo yashit bigeon galecha. And again, and here, yashit, basically, yashit, of course, is from sheet, again, sheet or shoot. And if we look at verse 11, if I look at verse 11, sorry, my son is here, my little son is here, sheet, it's Kalim perfect, and here he shall basically set, put with bigawon galecha, your waves, and gawon is usually understood with your proud waves. But you have to do a little bit of paraphrasing here just to make it sound decently in English, because if you go with a very literal translation, you might want to check YLT here. Young literal translation doesn't make much sense. But the general meaning, I think, is clear here. The general meaning is, thus far you shall come and no further, and here shall your proud waves be stayed. Now, if we go a little bit further, actually, I was going to jump to all the way to 36 and 37, so read the verse, the rest in English. But I would like to jump a little bit further, so to read the rest in English, and then you go to the end, go to some of the verses in the end. Just notice what I want to point out to you. Just a second, please. Johan, please go away. Sorry, Johan is here, and I guess my wife somehow escaped from my wife. So, because my wife is taking care of him, but somehow he escaped and he's here. Doesn't want to get out. But anyway, so now please study very carefully these verses 36, 37. Notice again the occurrence of Chokhmah, Bina, Chokhmah. So again, these recurring words that appear here. And I put some of the translation, and then also move to chapter 40. So read chapter 39 too. And then we're moving all the way to chapter 40, because I want you to pay attention a little bit to what is happening to the response of Job. So we want to see the response of Job, and also we will see the response of Job, of course, at the end of Yahweh's second speech. But notice again, Yahweh speaking the second time Yahweh is speaking the second time in chapter 40, and it says, "The Lord answered Job, and he said, Harov im Shaddai isor mochiach Eloah Yanina." But here, this whole thing is contested. In fact, if you read translation, so make sure you read more than one translation of verse 2. Here is the ESV, shall a fault finder, Isor, a fault finder, contend, from Rov, with the Almighty. And then it says, he who argues with God, let him answer it. Sorry, I had to send Johan out. So then, again, if we look at another translation, will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who argues with God give an answer. So Mokiach. So make sure you study this. But this is of course what God is telling Job. Will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? So here, understanding, Yasar, to correct, or here Yakach, to rebuke, or to argue. The one who argues with God, let him give an answer. Ya'anena, let him give an answer. So again, various translations, because it's not easy. It's not easy, the Hebrew and the arrangement in this particular case. It depends again how you understand this particular form, and also how you translate yakach. Yakach, again, a word that appears a lot in, of course, in wisdom literature, and the same thing with this. But he continues, Vayan Yov et Adonai Vayomer. So Job now answers the Lord and he says, Hein kaloti ma ashiveka. Yadi samti lemofi. So behold, from Kalal, I am basically of small account. I'm something light. I'm a lightweight compared to you. What can I answer you? What can I answer you, or how can I answer you? Of course, from shuv, to return, in the sense of answer. Yadi, my hand, I put to my mouth. So Job is saying, I'm putting my hand to my mouth. Once, achat dibarti. Once you spoke, v'lo ya'aneh, and I shall not answer. And 2 times, and I shall not, literally, I shall not add, or I shall not continue. I'll not reply. Here is a little bit paraphrasing. It's a little bit, it's definitely not very literal here, but literal, and I shall not continue. I shall not add to anything that you've spoken. Right? This is the second time that God speaks. Vayan Adonai et Yov min Sarah Vayomer. And again, God spoke again to Job from the whirlwind, and he said. So this is, of course, the second speech of Job, and we will look at it later. We will look at it next time, but please study this and especially read chapter 38, 39, and the beginning of chapter 40. Thank you, and God bless. And sorry for Johan, but makes at the same time the lecture a little bit more hopefully more funny. God bless, and see you soon.